Historical facts you will instantly regret learning. Former dictator of Equatorial Guinea, Francisco Macias Nguema, had 150 of his opponents executed in a football stadium by his soldiers dressed in Santa Claus costumes. In the 18th century, a woman called Mary Toft convinced doctors that she was giving birth to rabbits by manually inserting the fluffy creatures in her body. In 1937, a soccer match was interrupted due to fog, but the goalkeeper Sam Bartram stood in the fog for 20 minutes without knowing it. Historical facts you will instantly regret learning, Part 2. In 1724, Margaret Dixon was found guilty of murder and hanged in public. After the hanging, she was pronounced dead and her body was bound to the nearest cemetery, where she was to be buried. However, the journey was interrupted by knocking and banging from within the wooden coffin. The lid was lifted to the sight of Margaret, quite alive. The law saw it as divine intervention and she was given a full pardon. Historical facts you will instantly regret learning, Part 3. In 1386, a pig in France was dressed in human clothes, tried in court, and sentenced to death for the murder of a child. This is the flag of River G County in Liberia, known to many as the ugliest flag in history. American writer Edgar Allan Poe married his first cousin Virginia when she was only 13 years old. This is a piece of cake still intact dating back to the wedding of Queen Victoria in 1840.
History facts they didn't teach you in school. World War II was the most expensive war, costing $4 trillion. Germany uncovers 2,000 tons of unexploded bombs every year. Wearing skirts was considered manly in ancient Greece. All British tanks are equipped with tea-making facilities. Albert Einstein turned down the presidency of Israel.
I'm not entirely sure people are aware of how long ancient Egyptian civilization lasted. Hopefully I can explain it in a way you haven't heard before. There have been over 30 separate Egyptian dynasties going back 5,000 years, right the way down to Alexander the Great and the Ptolemaic dynasty, right up until the Roman conquest. Now, we've all heard this one before, that the Cleopatra was born closer to the moon landings than she was to the building of the first pyramid of Giza, by about 700 years. But here's where things get crazy, because when the first Great Pyramid of Giza was being built, mammoths were still walking the earth. In fact, they wouldn't go extinct for another 600 years after the pyramid was completed.
What are some ridiculous history facts? Ancient Romans would put sandals on the hands of sleeping people, then tickle their face so they would slap themselves. When the Romans laid siege to Themyscira, a real place, weirdly enough they attempted to tunnel into the city. The Themyscirans released bears into the tunnels. Claudius Drusus died in AD 20 from asphyxiation when he tossed a pear in the air and caught it in his mouth. The pear tree was put on trial, found guilty of murder, and destroyed. The Spartans never built a city wall, figuring that their reputation alone would mean no one would dare attack them. But during the Persian War, the Persians, who had already burned Athens twice, hired a Greek guide to take them to Sparta. But when they got there, they saw a kind of crap-looking city without even a wall. They figured there was no way this place could be the mighty Sparta they had heard so much about. So they figured the Greek was lying, and thus Sparta was spared. In ancient Egypt, servants were smeared with honey to attract flies away from the pharaoh. The first bomb dropped on Berlin by the British during World War II claimed no human casualties, but it did kill an elephant.
Here are 3 crazy facts about childbirth throughout history. Number 1, pregnant women and midwives would drink beer throughout the labour, and this became known as groaning ale. Number 2, the first pregnancy book was, surprise surprise, written by a man who knew nothing about childbirth. The Rose Garden for Pregnant Women and Midwives by Dr. Eucharius Russlin came out in 1513. He thought that babies in the womb just looked like little adults. This book was actually popular for 200 years and translated into 5 languages. Number 3, the friends and midwives of women who were giving birth were referred to as godsibs. This meant that they were doing the work of God. But they were soon referred to as gossips because they chatted so much during the labour about other people in the town. so the meaning of the word changed to mean rumour or report of intimate nature.
Dead people can give birth, so let's talk about coffin birth. Coffin birth's scientific term is post-mortem fetal expulsion, and it typically happens within 48 to 72 hours of the parent dying. Gases will build up within the dead body, which will then forcibly push the fetus out of the genitalia of the parent, hence leading to coffin birth. Now, I am going to be showing skeletal remains of parents who were found with their children in a demonstration of coffin birth, so if that's something which disturbs you, then you might want to look away now. So you can see right here that these are the remains of the parent and child who went through coffin birth. These are the remains of the fetus, which are partially emerged from, that looks like the hip bone, indicating that the gases probably pushed them out, otherwise the bones will be found closer to the ribcage area in the skeleton. This is another example of coffin birth, but an older one. Here you can clearly tell that coffin birth has been experienced as the bones of the child are between the parent's legs, indicating that they were expulsed partially from the corpse. It's morbid, but unfortunately it's just biology and that's what happens sometimes. There are cases of coffin birth happening both historically and in the modern day. A 30-year-old woman was found who had unfortunately died of a heroin overdose, and because she was severely decomposed, people were shocked to find a also severely decomposed fetus partially emerged from her genital region. You can imagine how shocking that must have been. Coffin births have also happened in the past as well, obviously. One of the cases that is often cited is from 1551, where a woman was hung, and after hanging in the hot Spanish sun for quite a while, 2 children fell out of her womb. Now, it's worth remembering that historical accounts like this can always be sensationalised or exaggerated by people who are alive at the time, so not sure if this exact situation happened. In the 1600s, there's also the tale of M. Topplace, who unfortunately died while she was pregnant. She was buried, but then her husband heard the sound of crying coming from her coffin, so they dug her up and found out she'd given birth to a son. Again, all of this stuff can be taken with a pinch of salt, as it is kind of gothic and it's in the far past, so people might have embellished or exaggerated stories, but coffin birth is a real medical phenomenon that really happens, and now you know about it. Make sure to follow me and my morbid mind for more death history, as I have loads more weird facts just waiting to be told.
Here are more facts I really wish I didn't know. 1. The pathologist who performed Einstein's autopsy stole his brain. 2. King Henry II employed a professional flatulist named Roland the Farter. 3. Anne Frank's father actually edited her diary, censoring passages about her period as well as her discovering herself. 4. Ben Franklin loved to take air baths in the morning, which is when he stood naked in front of his window. 5. Thomas Edison fatally executed a circus elephant in front of a crowd as a PR stunt. 6. During World War II, Russians trained dogs to run under German tanks with bombs strapped to their back. Only this backfired. See, the dogs could only recognize Russian tanks, and so they ran under them, blowing up the home team. 7. When Henry VIII's wife, Catherine of Aragon, died, the autopsy showed that her heart had turned black. 8. Julius Caesar was pronounced Julius Kaiser in ancient Rome. 9. Sideburns are named after the American Civil War soldier, General Burnside.